Hey YouTube, Alex Conley here, and in today's video I want to answer the question, why are some people motivated to leave Western countries? And the first thing I want to get into is, what is a Western country? Well, in my mind, when I hear the phrase Western country, I think the United States of America, I think Canada, I think the United Kingdom, I think Australia, perhaps Israel. Typically, these countries are, by many standards, classified as Western or Westernized. English is prevalent. There's generally similarities between culture, cost of living, lifestyle, even food, where they just have certain things in common that most people would see as making them somewhat similar. So what are the reasons? Why would somebody want to leave a Western country? I mean, these countries are extremely popular among immigrants, people looking for a better life. They're wanting to move to, say, Australia, United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Israel, etc. Well, the first and most obvious one is each of these countries has a high cost of living. So if you're looking to live near a job center, where a place where you can get a good job, and if you want to move up, you can get another good job. It's going to cost a lot of money. Now, some people will say, "Oh, well, it's real cheap to live in, where I live in, the middle of the New Mexico desert." Well, the middle of the New Mexico desert in the southwestern U.S. does not have a lot of jobs. There's not a lot of economic opportunity there for the average person. So if you're talking about places where people can get a good job, San Francisco, London, Sydney, Tel Aviv, Vancouver, all these cities are very expensive. So right off the bat, if you're living there and you're trying to keep up with the day-to-day, you're probably working, in one of these cities, you're probably working a lot of hours. You're probably working more than 40 hours a week. You may be working more like 50 or 60 hours a week. So you're working a lot to keep up with the expensive standards and the expensive cost of living. Your rent is expensive, your transportation is expensive, your food is expensive. You're having to put forth a lot of effort to stay on top. Not to get ahead, just to stay on top of your bills. So certainly alongside that, each of these places has high taxes, relatively high tax rates. You could be paying as much as 40 to 50% of your income in taxes. Now, some people will say, well, income tax is only 35 to 40%, but that's not accounting for sales tax. That's not accounting for gasoline tax. That's not accounting for property tax. That's not accounting for sin tax. There's a variety of other taxes beyond just income tax that you can't really avoid. So taxes are not low in these areas. Now, you do get some things for your services, and that needs to be acknowledged, whether it be in some of these countries, healthcare, well-funded police services, well taken care of roads, etc. But these are not optional. You cannot opt out of taxes. If you attempt to avoid paying taxes, there's some very, very serious and heavy penalties for doing so, and it's not recommended. If you're living in one of these countries, and really any country, you need to follow the local tax system. I'm not a financial advisor, but it should be common sense that everyone has to pay taxes. So, kind of moving on from the unavoidable high cost of living and high tax structure, some people in the West just don't have family. I mean, family sizes and birth rates in the Western countries have been declining. And in my case, at 27, I lost my mom around 20 years ago. Didn't really know my dad. And beyond that, I'm not close with the rest of my family. I think my grandmother is my only really living family member I still have contact with, and she's 90 years old next year. So I don't have these connections. I don't have a family home to go back to on the holidays. I've spent, since I turned 18, probably 8 out of 10 Christmases alone. And similarly for Thanksgiving, and it's just not, there's just not that sense of well-being that I get from the holiday season. I don't get excited. A lot of people, some people in the West get excited for the holidays. They get to go and catch up with family. Maybe they live in a different part of the country. But for me, it's just not there. I actually am not big on the holidays, and I'm happier in the spring after they're all over, just because move past the sad memories. So for me, there's just not that excitement about family time, and I don't have family, and they're not coming back. Like, that's the thing, is it's not something that in 10 years, my family members that have passed away, like my grandfather, not coming back. That's not going to change. What's done is done. When people have passed on, it's forever. So there's, that's another incentive for me not to stick around in the States forever. Um, not, not having family, basically. Next, so frustration with politics and divided country. Now, in this section of the video, I'm not going to talk about, pro this or pro that. I think that regardless of which side of the political spectrum that you're on, regardless of where you're at on the political spectrum you're on, you can agree that politics in the United States, now I don't know as much about the political system in Canada, Australia, UK, Israel, etc., but in the United States, it's very divided. Most people are here or they're there. There's not as much in between. Now, there are some people in between, but most people feel very, very strongly about politics, and the way that they feel is opposite that of, say, the other half of the country. So that comes up in conversation a lot. One of the things that I've been really enjoying about my trip abroad is I don't hear about it as much. It's not so much that I feel one way or the other. It's that I have friends that are diametrically opposed from each other, and I'm constantly hearing the anger and the frustration at our system in their voices, regardless of which side they're on. I find that people on both sides of the political spectrum, regardless of who is president, are frustrated and unhappy. And when I go abroad, I don't hear that as much. I'm simply not as exposed to the frustrations and the anger that seems to pervade American culture. And it's the issue I have with it is when I think about my life moving forward, I want some pretty simple things. One of the things that I like about moving abroad is the idea that I could build a life of normalcy and have some really basic things I haven't had in America. I don't have a family. I've struggled financially. I've had a lot of really major, serious things go wrong in my life, some of which were outside of my control. And so when I hear people complaining about politics, I'm like, look, there's people in the world that are starving to death. There are people in the world that constantly worry about serious violence. There's a lot more serious problems, not to downplay it, but there's a lot of things to be angry and upset about, and we really need to address the things that we have more control over. And so that's kind of my frustration in America, is there's this sort of anger about things that we don't have as much agency or autonomy over. So kind of moving on from that, frustration with the dating scene. So if you can't tell by now, I'm ethnically an Asian man. Typically, Asian men tend to rank very low when it comes to dating. I've had some good experiences in the States dating. I've had some negative experiences in the States dating. I'm kind of past it. I've dated a lot of, for lack of a better phrase, Anglo women in the States, and I find that culturally we can disagree on some things, and I found since going to Asia, there's a lot more overlap between my background. I was raised by my grandmother. She's Japanese. She grew up Shinto Buddhist. There's a lot more overlap culturally when I tend to date women from Buddhist backgrounds. We tend to just see things a little bit more eye to eye. We tend to agree a bit more. It's different from dating people with a Christian background. I wouldn't call myself a Christian. I grew up around a variety of Christian people. I feel like the overlap is not always there when I'm dating people of a Christian background. Even friendship with people with a Christian background just doesn't always line up. There's just different sets of values, attitudes, ideas toward life, and that's okay. But I prefer to go where I have more positive experiences on average, and I found that dating abroad has been a better experience overall than dating in my home country. Okay, so the next, looking for a more vibrant life. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, sometimes, not always, but sometimes life in a Western country can come across as kind of boring. I mean, a lot of people that I know, and not all people, and not all the time, but a fair amount of people, particularly people that are not high income earners. It's a little bit different if you have the income to travel and to eat at good restaurants and go to concerts and engage in a lot of different cool activities. But if you're like the average person, your day, most of your week is spent preparing to go to work, B, working, or C, commuting home from work, D, eating dinner, E, going to bed to get ready to wake up the next day and go to work. And then on the weekends, you're just simply recovering from the work week. And you repeat that week after week after week after week. And I know some people will say, oh, that's around the world everywhere. But if you're not working towards something, if you're not working toward fulfillment, if you're working primarily to fund a extremely consumer-oriented lifestyle, then it's kind of confusing to see what people are working toward. This doesn't apply to all Americans, but there's a substantial amount of people in my country, in America, that they work hard simply to fuel more consumption. They're not interested in living below their means. They're not interested in building up security in the form of a bank account. They're not even interested in career progression beyond just making more money. And I understand that can sound a bit callous and like, oh, well, you must not have struggled for money. I have struggled for money before. But I think it's worth pointing out that there is a sort of a hedonic treadmill that exists in a lot of Western countries. And I've noticed this within my own family. I've noticed this within other families, friends, etc. And so I find that when you get away from the hedonic treadmill, when you get away with simply trying to work all the time to fund a consumer lifestyle, that there's more opportunities for spontaneity and vibrancy. There's more opportunities to have genuine connection beyond just a business opportunity or escaping or distracting yourself from your problems. Because money will not solve all problems. Money solves certain problems. Money opens up doors. But when I think of being fulfilled, money does not always make people fulfilled, and consuming more does not make people more fulfilled. Some of the people I know with a substantial amount of money do not have a sense of fulfillment. Now, is that true for all of them? No, not at all. I don't want to just, say, oh, let's hate the rich because they're not fulfilled. Not at all. But I've known some people that by anybody's measure would be financially successful, but they don't use this to create vibrancy, fulfillment, spontaneity, enjoyment in their life. They're chasing more. Whatever amount that they have, it's not as much as the next wealthiest person, and so they want more and more and more. And no matter what point they get to, they always want more. They don't ever get to the point where they're satisfied with what they have. And that's just, I've noticed that's a common thread in America, regardless of the city I'm in, regardless of the state I'm in. It's a common thing to want more. They get some might get a nice vehicle, and then within a few months, that's their standard. They're used to it. It's no longer exciting. They want something faster. They want something more luxurious. So why are some people motivated to leave Western countries? Well, kind of moving on to the next point, tired of relying on a car. So I don't like driving. I don't like any part of driving. I've almost never really liked driving. I liked driving like for about the first year. Back then, my home city was a lot less crowded. It was a lot less expensive. You could get around town easier, just cruise around, have a good time. But now I've found most cities in America, particularly right now with the strong economy, feel extremely crowded. And so commuting just becomes a miserable slog that's part of everybody's day. I mean, there are some places in California, LA in particular, where people will commute 2 hours each way. And that's a pretty extreme example, but I think the average commute in America is like 45 minutes each way. So that's like 7.5 hours a week, 30 hours a month that people spend in a car driving to and from work. And if they're not on a car and they're on public transportation, it's still time that's not the, people don't like commuting, they have to for money, but if you pursue an independent, location-independent career, you're not going to be forced to be in that commuter situation. I know a lot of people don't have that luxury. A lot of people do have to commute to work, but in a lot of Western countries, it's simply not an option. Housing is extremely expensive and competitive. Housing near job centers is hard to get. The housing that is close to job centers is often older and smaller, less luxurious, may have more structural issues, just simply as a matter of being older. It's challenging to deal with commuting, and not only that, but let's say you don't live right next to your job center, you're gonna rely on a car. If you need to get groceries, if you need to get go run errands, if you need to pay your bills, if that can't be paid online, if you need to do a lot of things, you're going to need to get in the car and drive there, and you're going to pay a premium for fuel, and you're going to deal with crowded roads. And when people say, "Oh, it's not crowded, it's not like India, it's not like China," well, it's relative, and to say that anything less crowded than China or India is not crowded is basically minimizing and deflecting the issue, and not really addressing the real issue in that population growth is a real thing in Western countries, at least in the United States. And the population grows, I think, something like 5 million people a year, 3 or 4 million people a year, a lot, several million people a year. And this issue is going to get worse over time. Commute times are only going to get longer. It's only going to become more expensive to commute. Cars are getting more expensive. Gasoline is going up in price. It's not going to be a non-issue in our lifetime. And I've heard that even in these population centers where you may not have to have a car, that the public transit is really suffering from overload. I've heard that in New York City, they're packed to the brim. And I noticed when I lived in the Bay Area, BART was packed all the time. I mean, there were many times where, you feel packed onto the train cars. And so a lot of these systems were designed for less people. They weren't designed for the volume of people that they're currently experiencing. So keep in mind that having to rely on transportation to get to and from work every day, it's eating a lot of your time, and it's eating a fair amount of your resources, and your time is not replaceable. Let's say every year you spend 360 hours commuting to work. Well, that's 15 days solid of commuting, and that you're not going to get back. You cannot get that time back. You cannot buy that time back. There is no way to get that time back. Now, let's say you do live financially responsibly and you're able to have a high-paying job where you put a lot of savings back. You could eventually do financial independence. You could reach financial independence, retire early. You're not dealing with all that. But for the vast majority of people, they're not going to do that. The vast majority of people are going to increase their consumption with their increased salary, and they're going to have to keep relying on a car and dealing with fairly miserable traffic conditions, competing with people for parking space. I mean, people have literally killed each other in the United States over parking spaces. People have gotten in fights over parking spaces. I mean, it's not, it shouldn't be minimized as just part of reality or part of life. It's unpleasant, and that's another reason why some people might want to leave a Western country if they can be location independent, is They may want to live somewhere where they're not commuting to work hardcore every day. Just walk to their computer, and maybe they find a local coffee shop and they're able to get things done without having to pull their hair out every morning and afternoon. So kind of, I mentioned this before, the hedonic treadmill, needing to keep up with the Joneses. There's an attitude that you need to consume a lot. There's definitely, in the United States, there's this undercurrent of I've got to have the best house I can afford, I've got to have the best car I can afford, I've got to eat at the nicest restaurants I can afford, I've got to have the fanciest vacations I can afford, stay in the best hotels. There's lifestyle inflation. People want to live a life that is high status and at the highest status of what their salary will allow for, and even higher than what they can reasonably afford. And you don't see this as much in some other countries. Some of the other countries I've been to, it's there somewhat. Naturally, Western culture, the United States, influences the whole world, but it's not. It doesn't seem to the same extreme. I notice that people value other things like in other cultures, some people value spending time with family. They value pursuing hobbies. They value spending time with friends. They value working on creative projects. And I just don't see as much respect paid toward these types of things in the United States. It's more often conversations center around how to make more money, or how much money they make, or how are they going to get the promotion. It's extremely competitive to an extreme where sometimes in conversations with people in the West, it seems like, how long is it going to take for the subject of work to come up? I mean, it's work seems to be the primary driver of people's existence, and rather than having spirituality or community, a sense of community, it's like people just worship money. And it's expensive to live in the West, and I can understand why people with financial pressure are pursuing money so heavily. But it seems like something you can't really opt out of. And if you try to opt out of it by living frugally, by living on the cheap, by not going to bars a lot, by not taking extremely fancy vacations, by not living in a luxury home, by not driving a fancy car, that people treat you with suspicion. They regard you as hiding something, or not participating, not playing the game. It's kind of ridiculous, and I don't see that changing. I don't see it changing, and I don't see myself ever really fully adapting to it. Now, am I going to need to do it for a while to pursue financial security? Certainly, I'm going to need to put up with commuting. Certainly, I'm going to need to put up with maybe some job situations I don't love. Certainly, these are all part of the reality of living, but the difference between my attitude toward this and other people's attitudes, many other people's attitudes toward this, is I'm looking for an exit strategy. I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I don't want to follow extreme consumption, drive a fancy car, have tons of debt, simply to feel better about how I'm perceived. I'm looking more for how I feel on the inside to be right. So the last couple of points I'm going to hit on: cold weather. In a lot of Western countries, and a large part of them, the weather's cold. Now, that's changing somewhat in the United States as people migrate south, but if you're living in the Midwest, or you're living in the Northeast, even the Pacific Northwest, the weather can be cold, and like really cold for like half the year. And if you don't like cold weather, it's kind of hard to opt out of it other than to moving somewhere else. Now, this isn't an issue like in, say, Australia. Australia is well known to be hot. Israel's the same way, well known to be hot. But if you're in like the UK, you're in Canada, you're going to have a solid portion of the year that's cold, and you can't opt out of that. So if you don't like cold weather, that's certainly another reason as to why you might be motivated to leave a Western country. Finally, cold people. I talked about people pursuing money, people pursuing status. Things get so competitive that people just don't have a reason to interact with each other beyond superficial means. I notice people not they're not able to nurture relationships with other people because they're so centered around getting more money, that everything else falls to the wayside in their pursuit of getting money. So people tend to be kind of cold because they look at you like, if you're not contributing to my career progression, if you're not helping me make more money, if I don't work with you, if I do not see some kind of utility in you, what's the point? Why do we have a relationship if I'm not getting something out of it? People can't simply just there's no small talk. It's all like, I don't know, the culture just comes across as like kind of more and more narcissistic as time passes. I don't think this was always the case, but I think in recent decades, based on my understanding, based on my observations, it's just really isolating, and to not be able to pursue strong relationships or good relationships with other people because of my lifestyle choices, like, living frugally, not drinking a whole lot. I barely drink. Not being super religious. It's tough, and I don't find these things to be as much of an issue in some of the other countries I've visited and spent time in. People seem to be more friendly. People seem to be more community oriented, and yeah. Now, is it perfect outside of the States or Western countries in general? No, not really. Nowhere is perfect, but these are some of the reasons why somebody would want to leave a Western country, why somebody would want to move to, say, a Thailand or a Malaysia or Philippines. It's not just one person either. It's not just a sprinkling of people. I mean, there's a substantial movement. There's YouTube channels about it. It's growing. I mean, the movement of people leaving Western countries is growing, and I think that as people make more money and they live more financially responsibly and they're able to save money and procure investments, that the people that can afford to do so will do so. I mean, all the young people, many of the young people I've spoken to do have this in mind, like, I'm going to stay in the West to make my money, and then after I get my money, I'm going to figure some other stuff out. Now, that's not all of them, but many of them certainly have this attitude. Is that something unique to me? Probably. I've kind of inevitably distanced myself from some of the heavy consumers because we just simply don't have that much in common. So part of that may just be my choice in friends. But yeah, I hope you enjoy this video. I hope I've answered the question, why are some people motivated to leave Western countries? I hope I didn't ramble too much. And if you enjoyed it, if you like this content, if you want to hear more and get more of my perspective, definitely subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you think down in the comments. If you disagree, if you want me to shut up and stop telling people about the wonders of checking out some other countries, let me know too. But I appreciate you taking the time to watch my videos, and I will see you next time.